I was thinking, I wish I had some sway in the music world, because I would put a blurb on your record saying, for all romantics, it's the perfect album to make out to. And I'm wondering, I've heard echoes of this kind of sound, like even back to, the movie of your life.
100%.
Which is a beautiful song. It's very ballady, and there's some Burt Bachrach in there somewhere.
100%.
Yes, but never an entire record. I would, as said, I would make out to this record if I had to.
Well, I mean, have we started the interview?
Yeah.
Great. Firstly, thank you. Secondly, you're 100% right. What you've just said as your kind of opening question is the exact right first opening question, because people are liable to say, oh, you've made an album that's a bit more jazzy, and if they want to use a kind of stupid pigeonhole word, lounge, which I don't like at all, but what they should be saying is you've always been making music a little bit like this. And this is the first time you've made a whole album of it, which is what you just said. So thank you for that. What I'll also tell you is you're so right about that Movie of Your Life is one of the few old songs I'm doing during this set. I'll be playing it right after I play Hey Director, because while the band was rehearsing for the first time to do these late style shows, which is my normal band from the Cabinet of Wonders, the English UK, but with an extra addition of a fantastic keyboard player, because we need two keyboards so David can play the guitar and the keyboards and Stephanie Sanders can play the keyboards. And while we were doing Hey Director, I suddenly realized, my God, this is a direct line. This song is a direct kind of, it's not actually about the same thing, but it uses exactly the same metaphor of compromise and willingness to sell out optimistically, which is in the first one, it's kind of the member of the public being disappointed that someone's taken this leap into something they hope will turn out great and doesn't. And in Hey Director, it's the guy himself pleading to the director. And people said, people have asked me, is that a spiritual thing? And somebody else thought it was about the Me Too movement, which it's a little bit about. But it's not. It's the guy who's not in his comfort zone, hoping everything will be okay. And I walked into a radio station. This is how right you are. I walked into a radio station in 1991. And do you remember when they had all the LPs on their shelves? They would put little stickers on and put remarks about the songs, play number 6, don't play number 12, it's got swear words in it. Do you remember those stickers?
Absolutely. At college radio stations as well.
Exactly, college radio stations. And in this college radio station, it had, play The Person You Are. Do not play track number, whatever Movie of Your Life was. It is terrible, easy listening music. That's what it said on the thing. And of course, I just thought that was funny. But years later, I think how much that person, and here's the punchline, would like this record. Because what's happened to music in the meantime, in the last 30 years, is it 40 or 30 years, is that, what would have seemed easy listening and horrible to somebody who wanted modern rock is probably exactly what that person's now listening to. So it just struck me as funny, but I used that merely to illustrate the point that you were exactly right. And I was making a little playlist, which I like to do things in little projects, as you've noticed, even the covers and the Springsteen covers. And I just like to do things in little blocks. It keeps me interested. And I did, but I didn't have the time to put together a playlist that would be like crumbs down the path or a thread through the maze of my career, linking Movie of Your Life and my first 2 albums to this record. And it included Very Sorry, I don't know what you know, but Very Sorry Saint from Who Was Changed and Who Was Dead, I'm Wrong About Everything, Certainly Negative Love, a song called When You Smile on that album. There have been many attempts by me to kind of do this thing. And it turns out that what I needed was not to write the songs myself. I needed to write the lyrics and have a genius who understands jazz and knows what I like, and I've been playing with for 10 or 15 years now, to write the melodies for me. And so that's what happened with this record. And that's why it sounds so beautifully well thought out, is because for once I was, you know, the fact is my musical limitations mean that I cannot do certain things, and it means that my albums will generally turn out somewhere between folk rock and power pop, unless I make a really conscious effort to push them as far in another direction. And when I was making the demos for this album, do you know the album at this? You know the album by now.
In 24 hours, yes.
Great. So Well Done Everyone and Everything All the Time, both of those things I wrote my own tunes for before I decided to ask David to start writing tunes. And I thought, oh, these are really great. These are jazzy. These are just what I listen to in the kitchen. And you know, when I recorded them at my friend Pete's house, and I got back and listened to them, and I was just like, it's just the same old thing. It doesn't sound different enough. And at that point, thank goodness, I was basically brave enough to go, I need to get somebody else to do this for me. And David was the obvious choice because he knows my taste so well. We drive around in the car. I send him music. He knows what I like. He sends me weird Italian stuff that I love. We listen to Teddy Pendergrass together. You know, it's like he's always got something for me and I've always got something for him. And that's what this album is.
Do you get as excited as you did as a young man hearing new music? Because it sounds like you do. I mean, if you're listening to Teddy Pendergrass, even early on, I remember I was in London, I was listening to public radio and they were playing a Steve Goodman song. And I was like, holy shit, I'm in London, they're playing Steve, I'm in Chicago right now. And lo and behold, it was you spinning records. And I think the song was, I forgot what the tune was. It was one of those.
Yellow Coat.
Yes.
It's all, I always play Yellow Coat by Steve Goodman. I think it's almost perfect, that song.
But here you were a guy in your 20s playing songs of people, your so-called predecessors and older people. So it seems like you were not that different from the young man who loved music.
Well, I am pretty horrible at keeping up with modern music. I mean, I admit that. That's always been the case with me. I'm always a step behind. I always wait for my friends to tell me what I will like. I just don't listen to a lot of modern music, but I am constantly discovering music that I like and want to listen to now with the help of Spotify, obviously, because I'm not a Luddite, but also just in record stores. I mean, you know, if you could just see the little, you know, the records I just bought back from England. I had to buy a suitcase for them, you know, to fit the extra records I bought. And I've bought some very, very exciting things. And basically what this album comes out of initially was, I wrote a set of lyrics I was really, really happy with. They're the lyrics on this album. And now David's put tunes to them. But when I was looking at the lyrics and thinking of this album that I wanted to make, what I was thinking was, well, sure, you know, I've known for years that folk music and protest music and lyrical music doesn't have to be just a bloke with wiry hair strumming a guitar and playing a harmonica. Right. And certainly that's what I thought it was for my first album. And then as I was making my earlier albums, the Attractions-y albums, I was kind of moving fully in that folk rock kind of direction, trying to always make it as poppy as I could, as much ABBA influence as possible. But then when I started to make albums on my own, like New Deal, you know, that was my attempt to go, okay, well, we can make this a bit more, you know, Baroque and Bee Gees. And then Awake, I was trying to bring in, you know, beats and sounds and rhythm tracks a bit more. I've always been trying to do something that's different. And with this album, my idea was simple. It was, why do I have to make, you know, Just Like Tom Thumb's Blues, right? When I can make Nina Simone's version of Just Like Tom Thumb's Blues. Why do I have to make George Harrison's version of My Sweet Lord? Not that anybody wouldn't want to do any of those things, by the way, but I could do, you know, Nina Simone's version of My Sweet Lord. And then you think, well, all that way. I've got all these lyrics and it's all the same. And what I've generally tended to do is take my music into an environment with musicians I really like the Jayhawks, one of my favorite bands, or the Decemberists, because I think, oh, well, these are just songs. They can impart their knowledge and love of music and their friendship with me, and we'll make a new thing. And it always seems to somehow sound a bit different because they're different players. With this album, I very much thought, let's allow, why not Mose Allison? Mose Allison's just a white guy with a lot of lyrics. Lyle Lovett's a white guy with a lot of, Randy Newman, Harry Nilsson, these are all, Joni Mitchell's had very beautiful, and it just made me feel there's no reason I shouldn't do this. If I listen to Mose Allison and Gary McFarland, whom I adore, and, Teddy Pendergrass, ridiculous, I know, and, Serge Gainsbourg and, all these various other people that the album is so clearly influenced by, why shouldn't I make an album by that? And the only thing really holding me back was my own inability to craft those arrangements and tunes. Luckily, I had an ace up my sleeve, and I have had for years, at David Nagler. And so that's how the album got made, once I became frustrated with my own ability to turn it into the more groovy thing that I wanted it to be. I sit in my kitchen and I listen to Sergio Mendes and Marcus Valle and, Airto and people. My music, I don't make Brazilian music, but why shouldn't one of my lyrics be like that? Why shouldn't it be like that? I'm 55, I can do whatever the fuck I want. And I decided that this would be a really beautiful album. Plus, we were just coming at the end of the whole, we're not at the end of the lockdown, but at the end of that whole time, looking back on the last 18 months, what the world needs now is beauty and elegance and fully thought out artistic ideas and being interviewed in people in a suit and a tie. I don't want any more scruffy Zoom calls. I mean, I know I've let the side down a bit here, but I just didn't do any Zoom concerts in the last 18 months because it turns out that even though I fully approve of people doing them, for me, I don't want to look at a computer screen in front of my books and play songs to 12 faces. I just don't want to do it. And that's apparently the bar below which my professionalism will not go.
It's amazing though. I think you give yourself, you're selling yourself short. I remember, because when you were talking, I was thinking, wow, didn't he do a great Tommy James cover of Crystal Blue Persuasion? And I remember listening you do an outro on that, like introducing the band. I was like, this guy's having the time of his fucking life right now.
And you know what? You're very good, because that's another of the 4 old songs we're playing at the show.
Oh, hey man, I should be your new John Landau.
No. Movie of Your Life is like the 5th song, and Crystal Blue Persuasion is going to be the closer, because I haven't done a show with a band playing in that style before. But now that band can play, I won't tell you what the other ones are, but that band can play Movie of Your Life, and it's a beautiful segue. And at the end, if we play Crystal Blue Persuasion, I'm both ending a show with a cover, which is a beautiful thing to do, but more importantly, I'm ending it with a cover that has always been an important one to me, and was kind of I think it was actually a single eventually off Name Above the Title. And sure, at the end of that, I'm like, say something like, welcome to the Startop Lounge, or wherever it is, and it's Pete Thomas on the drums. And you're absolutely right. I don't know about, you
know what I mean?
Yeah, I've not or ever been a household name. I've got a lot to be modest about, Steve. Really. I really try and make the very best albums I can, but I'm in the lucky position of never having had a one-off, one-hit wonder hit that I've never even had that. You know what I mean? Like, I've had a song in movie soundtracks, and people know certain songs more by me, and people who don't know my music at all kind of go, oh, did you, people know certain songs, but I haven't got a La Bamba in my closet, or a, whatever, you think of all those bands or Dead Skunk, but I haven't, you have to live those things down, really. And I've never even got that high up the ladder, but I do make, when you are in that position, I do feel that you owe it to your audience to be working never to be lazy, to work, even if it's, you know, a few years between albums, to really deliver something different and a fully fleshed out artistic thought every time, and have it sound as good as it can. I'm very, very old-fashioned. The idea with this album, once we got the songs and once I heard what it sounded like and could sound like, the idea was cut it at the Green Mill at 12, midnight, 3 nights running to whoever shows up, and release it as a live album, because there's a lot of albums like Noel Harrison's got a live album I really like that. My first album was, of course, a bit like that. And I really liked the idea of doing it in that way with a brilliantly rehearsed band. But of course, COVID got completely kiboshed that idea. And then I sat on the stuff for a bit and I was like, well, what should I do? And then finally I came up with the right idea, which was finish it in the very lushest and best way that I possibly can, and put it out.
One of the things that I'm always very, I would say, grateful, because I am one of your fans, and that you do make yourself accessible. Like I'm one of your Facebook friends, and
right,
you know, you've let people in as much as you want into your life. You know, and I know that your mother passed away. Yeah. And you know, in addition to offering my condolences,
thank you.
Not only was she beautiful, but just seemed very interesting. And I was thinking, that's the one who spawned Wes, and and she must have had some kind of influence on him, or your father or something. So if you don't mind, you know, if you could tell me a little about your mom and growing up in Hastings, and just in a nutshell, because it's something that not everyone speaks adoringly of their parents, you know.
Yeah. My you know, what they really gave me, what particularly, first to talk about this, my mother was very involved in music. You know, she ran this international musical festival. She'd been a singing teacher. She'd been a head of music at a school. She gave singing lessons her whole life. She played, I think, she played Dido in Dido and Aeneas, an opera that's the only time I actually remember her being in an opera. I was very, very little at the time. But, you know, that's an opera that I've ended up coming back to just recently. So the musical influence was profound. Not that she gave me lessons even ever once, though she did give me advice every now and then. Like I remember her saying in Sussex Ghost Story, she heard that and she went, oh, you shouldn't go knife on that line. You should go knife. And that should be a one-note word. Don't lose that. So she was full of good advice, technical advice like that. But it wasn't so much that as just the complete submersion in music the whole time, because everyone was either singing, or there was singing coming up from downstairs where she was doing her lessons, or I was playing my music, or whatever it was. There was just music everywhere. And my parents split up when I was very young, but my father was part of that too. Was very, you know, great music lover, not a rock person at all. Like he never, I mean, he's the right age, but he never bought a Beatles record. He never even got to the rock era, and would freely admit that music, I mean, he liked a bit of jazz, you know, but that's where it stopped him. My mother wasn't a music person, a modern pop person either, although she was a great supporter of those more up-to-date categories in her music festivals, because it got kids interested, you know, and kids all want to, you know, when she started, everybody wanted to sing Purcell and Benjamin Britten. Now everybody wants to sing the songs from Frozen. And of course, so, you know, and you adapt with those times. But she was just a wonderful person, and it's very, very sad that she died incredibly suddenly, right on the first day of the first tribute to John Wesley Harding tour. And so we cancelled it after one night in DC, had to. There were only 10 dates of that first tour. And I flew back to England, obviously, and, you know, the rest of the year was fucked. And then when I was in England just a couple of weeks ago, they finally have a headstone up and the dedication of that. So that was beautiful. But I don't like to either minimize. My father lives on and lives in Italy, and I spoke to him not an hour and a half ago. And I say gesturing to my treadmill, which is the only time I'm ever on the phone, is on my treadmill, to my father. And though I am I never like to minimize his part in that too, because he's a man of the intellect and a classical Latin and Greek scholar. and, you know, working and translating every day, even today, and was a schoolmaster for ages. But he was always, you know, very supportive of the music that I wanted to do, even though I didn't even pick up a guitar till 16 or 17 or something like that. I didn't go to any music schools or take any music lessons except on the clarinet when I was very young. But the only thing I'm squeamish about ever talking about, I'm happy to talk about my mother and I'm happy to talk about my dad. I just don't really talk, you don't see a lot of pictures of my kids on the internet. You know, I don't really feature them at all, unless one of them's on stage with me, which has happened occasionally. But yeah, my you know, my family, my father and mother were, you know, one's dead and one's alive, and they were, of course, very influential. But I think my mother and I did have a very close relationship.
I'm always amazed, you know, because I saw that your mom was born and she's exactly my mom's age. And they were probably about the same age as the Beatles, but maybe from a different world. So I always wonder, and I always got a kick out of meeting adults that didn't like the Beatles, especially in England. I remember saying, oh, I hated that. I was a Motown person, you know?
Right.
And so it wasn't as mystifying, you know, for them. But naturally, I just wanted to know, you know, because it's interesting. I'm interested in young artists and how they're nurtured by or not nurtured by their parents.
Well, I mean, it's a funny thing to say, but in a way, I think there's almost too many people who want to be artists nowadays. Like my generation, you were lucky to find a supportive parent who, I mean, basically, once I went to Cambridge, and which he wanted me to do, wanted me to go to university. I mean, he was a little bit of a snob about it, and he's of the generation where Cambridge and Oxford is probably, you know, better in some sense than Keele and, you know, Bristol, but just in his head, you know. And so I happened to get a place at Cambridge, and then I got out of Cambridge, you know, with a good exam result. And after that, God love him, he never complained at me or pushed me in any direction. I think he kind of was like, well, you did what I want you to do, and now spread your wings kind of thing. And that was a very helpful attitude too. But they, you know, far be it from we like Motown. I mean, my dad wouldn't know what Motown was, nor would my mum. They'd never have known what Motown was. They would have registered the Beatles' big Royal Variety performance. That would have been the one that permeated their consciousness, because probably that's why it's so famous. Like Bowie doing Starman on Top of the Pops, that's another one, but they wouldn't have known a thing about that unless I'd been watching it, and they'd have gone, what is that bloke doing? You know, what are these freaks doing? So it's just that I think, excuse me, that classical music generation, that was possible to miss out on everything altogether, I think. You didn't have to try that hard, probably.
You just reminded me of the funniest line in the Blackadder World War I series, when Rowan Atkinson tries to identify a spy. He says, oh, no doubt he went to brilliant institutions like Cambridge, Oxford, or Hull.
Yeah.
And Stephen Fry says, oh, I'll say, you know, Oxford and Cambridge are dumps.
Yes.
No, but how are we doing on time?
Fine. Let's do another 20 minutes.
Sure. I think that, listen, I would love to hear you sing, you know, HMS Pinafore or some Gilbert and Sullivan stuff. I think you could do it, but maybe that's in the offing. Maybe that's further down the road.
There's always a few ideas. I mean, at one point, this album was going to be a duets album with Kelly Hogan at one point. Didn't happen, again, probably because of COVID, but that's a project in the future that I'd like to do and she'd like to do. Just a question of writing the songs and doing it. There's always things around the corner, but I have to say also, music is changing. I mean, not music, but music business is changing so much. And I love doing what I do, and I feel totally energized by this record. I'm famous for not wanting to rehearse. And that might seem funny from somebody who does, you know, my Cabinet of Wonders show, which is in a sense all about rehearsal. Right. I'm quite happy doing it on my own, but with my own songs, I always feel like the rehearsal isn't really for me. I'm just the cheerleader, kind of running my voice ragged and singing songs and trying to help everybody along. But with these songs and this rehearsal, I mean, I really look forward to every time. I honestly feel quite honored to sing some of the songs. I think David's done such a terrific job, and our back and forth about them after he'd done them, a couple of the songs we really got into and made different intros and bits and parts for to make them less, a couple of them sounded not quite individual enough to me. So the whole process has been beautiful. And now when I get up to sing All the U's, I mean, which was the kind of first track off the album that anyone heard. I mean, I approach that song, I kind of feel like Leonard Cohen might have felt when he used to say those kind of quasi-religious things on stage about the honor of laying the song before you on your altar, you know, and you think, oh, does he believe all that shit? But he did, and I do. And I think part of it is that I'm able to appreciate something deep in them that I didn't create. Some of them are a little like singing a cover. And in fact, what's really interesting is that for the stage show, I'm only playing acoustic guitar on two or three of the new songs. I'm playing guitar on the old songs, but only a couple of them. But in case I'm on a radio station and somebody says, oh, play a song off the new album, I've made it my goal to work out a version of each song. I'm not quite finished. Work out a version of each song that is my acoustic version that I can play solo. Or say, if Robert was with me, I could say, oh, just learn this riff and then do a solo here and play the chords, and that'll be the version of the song. And what's fascinating about it is I'm approaching it very like I approach doing a cover of a big rock song solo acoustic, like the version I did of Like a Prayer, or like the Bruce Springsteen covers that I've done and did quite recently down in my basement, which is you take the bones away from it. You take the flesh away from it till all it is a melody and some words. And then you put in as little guitar as possible as can suggest everything else that's happening in the song. It's like distilling a cover when I do that. And that's what it was like doing that to my own songs. And so I've really got this really exciting relationship to these songs where every time I step up to them, I feel I'm doing it not just because I've got to sing a song, but because it's, you know, it's kind of for David and his song too. And it's a really good feeling, you know, like when I play Ashes to Ashes or even Little Musgrave, it's like, I've got to add something to this. Otherwise there's no point in doing it. You know,
do you ever push yourself to, because there's a lot of changes on some of these songs.
No fucking kidding.
Yes. So
there's chords I don't even know.
That's an exciting project. You might be coming out of this a better guitar player.
I have this. Oh, I wish that were true, but I fear that what's actually going to happen is that I'm going to know all these chords and learn them and get them in my muscle memory and then not actually know what they're called at all. But here's what happens. So here's all the U's. Yeah. So what happens is the first chord in it is A major 9 add 6. Now, I can handle an E major 9 add 6. Now, I can handle an E major chord. I know what that is. But then when it comes to 9 add 6, I'm like, well, perhaps I'll get out Guitar Toolkit, which has every chord known to man on it. And then perhaps I'll write on here the way I understand it. You play that by going 076670. So that's what I did yesterday. I just sat here and went, okay. There you go. And then the second chord is, and those are chords I have never, I mean, the ironic thing is I might have played all those chords and probably have played all those chords by mistake at some point without quite knowing what they were called, because I tend to do funny shapes in my songs anyway, but I never quite know what they're called. They're just the places my fingers go when I'm making up the medley. But so this is a really exciting thing to do, to kind of take these apart and then reconstruct them, because at some point I'll be wanting to play these songs with Robert. And when I do that, they're going to have to be good.
Well, tell me, just before we go, tell me a little about David and how you guys met, because I bet you went kicking and screaming, not to work with him, but just in general, where you have to give up some of your power to somebody else or make it a collaboration. It's not something that comes easy to people, but in this case, it's a great success.
Okay, well, there's two things to know here. Firstly, I met David shortly after I and possibly he had moved to New York City. I was introduced by the great Chicago songwriter, Chris Mills. And Chris Mills introduced us to the place. David just told me all this the other day. I thought I'd met David at the merch table at Schuber's, but it turned out I'd met David's wife, Therese, at the merch table in Schuber's, and actually met David later at Dojo opposite the Bottom Line. And we became friends. And then when the Cabinet of Wonder, I knew he was good with the work because he organized an album for Chris Mills that they kind of recorded live in Chicago with strings and all the great people in Chicago and singers. And I got some reports back from that, not that I'd asked, but from mutual friends, that he'd just done a wonderful job on it and how great. And when the Cabinet of Wonders started, we're 100 shows in now, but for the first show, I had no band. It was just me and some people I'd got together. I can't remember who. And we got 3 shows booked. And after the first show, I just realized, fuck it, this show needs a band. You can't do it without a band. You need a band, if not on stage the whole time, then ready to go, well drilled. You need an opening number. You need a closing number. You know, I suddenly thought all this stuff. And so in the month between the first show and the second show, all change. Steve Goulding on the drums, David Nagler, musical director, Eddie Carlson on the bass. And then Steve Goulding was touring a lot, so we couldn't get him all the time. And so that developed a bit. But basically, David Nagler, musical director, and Eddie Carlson on the bass, who played in Poi Dog in Chicago, that's been the basis of the Cabinet Band. And that's how long I've known David. I didn't feel at all worried about collaborating with him because we've been friends for 10 years. I've never handed, for one of my own albums, I've handed lyrics over to other people and they've set them to music, but I've never done it and would never have dreamed of doing it for my own music because I'm a singer-songwriter, right? You know, I write my own songs, but because of what we were talking about earlier, I didn't want that for this album. It could easily happen again when I want to make my next album of power pop, but you know, for this, I wasn't into it. But the only thing I will say is that I think one thing that gave me the confidence or humility to just hand them over, it was the experience of writing the opera that I wrote, Dido's Ghost, with the composer Erilyn Wallen, that was just in England and Scotland and is going to come to America, because with the libretto, she's a classical composer, and with my libretto, I handed that over to her and I said nothing till I heard it the first night. I mean, nothing. And I couldn't go to the first night, but I watched it streaming from the Barbican, you know, on my TV set in my sitting room on a Sunday afternoon, and along with, you know, a couple of thousand other people around the world in separate places and people who were in the hall itself. And I just, you know, that was a major experience, hearing that back to me for the first time. It wasn't like they were hiding it, but the rehearsal process meant I could only really watch on Zoom calls, and you can't really hear anything if somebody puts a computer up with the Zoom on in like a church where they're rehearsing, you can't hear. And then she sent me some computer MIDI files with the voices just like MIDI things, but everything was so distant. So it was a very weird experience, but a very enjoyable experience. And I think that did also give me the confidence to just let go.
Didn't you find that that's the case though? I don't like to say the older anyone gets, but the more experience they amass and the more confidence that they have in their art or their writing.
Yeah, I mean, you know, when you're a kid and playing the guitar and you're writing those songs with all those words that everybody thinks are so amazing, and then the older guys tell you, oh, you know, listen to John Prine and write don't use 3-syllable words and write little short. You just think, oh, fuck off. Just let me do what I'm doing now. And I'm sure I'll end up doing what, maybe I'm not end up doing, but I'll make a move in that direction. Well, that does happen. There's no doubt about it. But really, as I grow older, I feel less like trying to please anybody but me. Just because, and I have good taste. I mean, it doesn't mean I'm going to just make an album of noise metal to fuck everybody off. I listen to music. I'm taking a lot of things in. I keep wanting to move and develop and make a new thing. And I think you see from the album cover, this album cover is not that different to Here Comes the Groove. It's not that different. It's just me on an album cover in a very, honest way looking at the camera, but it gives you a feeling as to what the album is. And what I like about this album is the gestalt, if you like, of everything about it. The cocktail glass, the beautiful Tony Stella portrait on the cover, the Barry Gifford short story when you open out the CD, the poster, the LP that's going to come, it's just, it all feels like a nicely thought out thing. And I find that to be very important to me now. But lyrically, I find that as I get older, although of course the phrases must be well turned and the interpretation must, you mustn't tell people what to think the whole time, and all that stuff still holds true. But I just love everything being clear. The older I get, the clearer I want it to be. It can be beautiful, it can be mysterious, it can be all kinds of things, but I want it to be clear. I want the feeling it gives to be clear. I want people to know what Where the Bands Are is about. It's clear what Where the Bands Are is about. Springsteen had a song called Where the Bands Are. And it's a great song. And it's about a very Springsteen-y thing, which is you and me can stop working on a Friday night and we can go where the bands are, because that's liberation from the working week and it's going to be our salvation. And that's also the salvation that Bruce offers on stage on a nightly basis when he's touring. I'd forgotten that song even existed, to be honest. But
that's what I thought I was going to hear when I honestly,
I had that other song called Where the Bodies Are years ago. And when you think about it, when you think about where the bodies are and where the bands are, what they're both from is that old beach music that movie Where the Boys Are, right? That's a famous movie, Where the Boys Are. Is that Annette Funicello or whoever that is? And
they have the song Where the Boys Are.
Right. And so I think that his Where the Bands Are and my Where the Bodies Are all where the boys are, because that's that phrase. That's where I think that's the phrase of where the are. Anyway, my thing's about is, what's that?
No, go ahead, finish that, because I wanted to ask something.
Yeah, all I was going to say was, but what my Where the Bands Are is about is how things have changed in the meanwhile, though again, I'd completely forgotten he had that song, where people don't want to be where the bands are anymore. They want to be backstage. They want to be in the meet and greet. They want the extra stuff, and that's what that song's about. And the point is because they want to Instagram it. They want to let people know where they are. They want to influence people. And when they finally get backstage after all that effort, there's no one there. Backstage, there's nothing there. There's nothing. It's gone. Yeah. The action is on the stage. Bruce Springsteen was right, And so each of my songs has that satiric thing still, but it's just very clear in the lyrics what what they're about. That's all.
I listened to Springsteen's memoir a lot because he reads it, and I thought about it before he even mentioned him. But I was thinking, wow. It would have been great to be in his band, but man, he must have rehearsed them to exhaustion.
Yeah.
And that sort of, I don't give a fuck what these guys, I'm going to curate something that's going to be exactly what I would want to listen to as a teenager, and then as an adult. And then, and to me, that's his genius.
It is. And it's giving your life and soul for rock and roll. I mean, if you just listen to how Thunder Road developed from Wings on Wheels, or I can't remember at this distance, but if you listen to what that song started off as and how it ended up as. It's just an amazing process of editing and progression towards perfection. And I think you probably can't underestimate John Landau's vision in all of that, as we all know, because we all know the stories. But I just don't have that in me. In fact, this is the first album. Part of the thing about the power pop folk rock thing is it does lend itself to my idea of making an album, which is you hand 12 songs over to your friends and you rehearse them for a couple of days and then you go in and make the album. I've never been in a situation like REM where 3 of us work on the backing track for a few weeks and then someone else, you know, is there and then they sing the song. I mean, I don't even know who they do it. That's irrelevant. But you know how the funny way people have made albums that you read about them. And so in a lot of my albums, there are many notes that could be almost anything because they're just what I thought of at the time and then insisted someone played. This album is not like that. This album has a lot of space on it. The space is very good for my voice because I don't have a kind of Freddie Mercury or David Bowie or Roger Daltrey type voice where it has that edge that cuts over. My voice has never done that. It's warm, I hope, smooth voice. And ever since I've grown up and really started singing well, which isn't adding vibrato in the Elvis Costello mode, but more just singing as nicely as I can in an English accent. I mean, that's all I can say. And that happened some time ago now, I hope, but particularly on Self-Titled, I was singing songs a little lower on that record and I really liked it. And I liked when I wouldn't let Pat the drummer play any cymbals on that record because I felt that the cymbals were getting in the way of my voice somehow. And so I just said, no cymbals. So he ended up with a big bruise on his leg from playing like this. So because he wasn't used to not being, you know, playing the cymbals. So he ended up with a huge bruise on his leg. But there's a lot of, this album is very well planned in terms of every single note on it. It's certainly the most like, I mean, I don't know if it's if it's a thing people would find terribly interesting, but it's certainly the most like a Blue Nile album or a Prefab Sprout album that I'll ever, you know what I mean? When you hear those beautiful records or Talk or something, and you hear those certain Talk records, you hear those records, you're just like, my God, they have labored over every single note of that. And sometimes that's off-putting and you're like, oh man, just play some fucking rock music. But with this album, it suited it perfectly. And again, that was David Nagler. You know, that was David Nagler's restraint and impulses.
You should really be proud of it. It's and I know you are, but it's fantastic. And I look forward to listening to it often. Are you coming to Chicago at all?
Well, it's funny you should say that. I have decided that touring in a block is not a good idea at the moment. And I don't like to be proved right by that, but I think that was a good move. I mean, people keep canceling their tours because, you know, you get COVID or someone gets COVID or a roadie gets COVID or someone at the venue's got COVID and someone's exposed and the whole thing's off the rails. So my plan is to do 1 or 2 dates at a time, really just surgical incisions. And I'm very much planning one of those to be Space in Evanston and maybe Cleveland on the way home. You know, a drive out and then two nights back with this band, because I'll definitely come back and play these songs, but I really want Evanston to see, I want this show in that place with Kelly and Nora free that night will be something to see. So that's a real, that's a beautiful oasis sometime before Christmas. I don't know when. I'm literally just asked my agent to look for some, you know, avails soon.
Wear the suit that you put on in Times Square.
Believe me. My first gig is in Boston tomorrow, and that suit is in its suit case, ready to be moved individually. all the way to Boston in the back of my car, along with the white shirt and the white shoes. So yes, that's what I'll be wearing.
Thank you for your time. I really appreciate it.
Steve, I really appreciate your attention. The way you are able to ask me such good questions about this album is because of your close attention to my previous career. And I really appreciate that.
Very welcome.
It makes the interview enjoyable.
I see the future. His name is
yeah.
Wesley Stace. All right,
buddy. Let me know when this goes up and we'll put it on Facebook.
Fantastic. I'll do just that. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.